before I ask an individual question to each person and introduce them more thoroughly, I'm just going to give you a quick introduction to the session. So let's have a little history. Not so long ago, at the turn of the millennium, when everyone was waiting for a massive crash, when IT systems were supposed to be running out of clock capacity or whatever, renewable energy at that time, 2000, meant hydropower, basically, if we're talking about the grids. National power grids were dominated by coal, nuclear, gas, and quite a bit of oil. Now, if you fast forward to 2022, wind and solar together became, for the first time, the biggest single source of power in the EU, providing 22% of the EU's electricity. The same year, Germany generated over half its power from renewable sources, 3/4 of which was wind and solar, which are the two, famously variable, intermittent sources of renewable power that we're here to talk about largely. Statistics like this might dispel the idea that you can't run a grid with huge sources of intermittent power. But there is a growing recognition now that should the concentration of intermittent power increase as dramatically as it's expected to do, it's targeted to do, we're going to need to develop the grids, not only reinforcing them physically, but also using IT and digitalization solutions to make sure that the power is monitored and distributed effectively. Just to give one example of the challenge we might face, the EU has a target for solar panels on all public and commercial buildings over 250 square meters by 2027, all new residential buildings by 2029. Somebody's going to have to monitor the generation and the amount of surplus power that's being fed into the grid and adjust things appropriately so we don't destabilize it. This means a huge quantity of data, which is going to have to be collated, processed, and reacted to by generators, TSOs, DSOs, which, in a roundabout way, brings us to the theme of today's session, digitalizing the grid for the twin transition, or energy gets smart. So, if I may, I'm going to jump straight into some questions. We're going to start with the Commission. Basically, everyone here knows that the Commission's just published a communication on the 2040 climate target, where the potential 90% reduction in emissions compared to 1990 is on the table. How can we ensure that the energy system is ready, especially from a digital point of view, to accommodate the huge amount of renewable power that that's going to entail?
Thank you, Robert, and good afternoon to everyone. It's my pleasure to be here and represent DG Energy. It's an interesting subject, a very important one, which we are dealing with in my unit, and I must say, digitization in the energy sector is not new, of course. We've seen a lot of digital solutions from the production of renewable energies down to the consumption, optimization of consumption, the development of building energy management systems, and where we have world leaders in Europe, and I think some of them are part of Digital Europe. But as we are moving towards an energy system that is becoming more and more decentralized, decarbonized, electrified, we need more and more digitization. And we need to balance the grid. We need to make sure that the supply of energy matching the demand for energy at all times. Make sure that we use all forms of storage in the energy system, including those that are coming from other sectors, like the batteries in your electric vehicles. So for all that, we need a complete management, and digital solutions can provide that flexibility and increased management. And that is why we are talking of a twin green and digital transition. And that's why we've come up with revised legislation that is creating a framework that is conducive to the penetration of digital solutions. I mean, the revision of the Energy Efficiency Directive or the Renewable Directive. We've got recently the adoption of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, which is also a milestone to promote the use of digital technologies in buildings. But legislation is not all. I think we need also enabling measures, and that's why in October 2022, Commission adopted the action plan for digitizing the energy system, and then we've come up with a series of measures to foster the exchange, the access and the exchange of data, to increase investments in smart grids, to engage consumers through digital solutions, and look at the other side as well. How can we increase cybersecurity in the energy system? How can we reduce the carbon footprint of ICT technology? So I think that's a comprehensive plan, which comes also with funding from different programs. I mean, Digital Europe, of course, but also Horizon Europe, where we have spent since 2014 around more than 1.5 billion euro in research and innovation in smart grid, smart energy systems. So all this, of course, is aiming at fostering the use of digital solutions in all aspects of the value chain in the energy sector.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on. We're going to have to go quite quickly here because there's only 40 minutes. So I'm going to move on very quickly to Jake Oster, who's Head of Energy and Environment Policy for the Europe, Middle East and Africa region for Amazon Web Services. Sorry. Yeah, so I mean, most people think of Amazon as a giant warehouse somewhere outside town and trucks delivering parcels around the city, but they're actually very big in cloud computing as well. So maybe, Jake, can you give us some idea of? We were talking just before about the amount of data that's going to be collated from all the distributed energy, renewable energy generation. How can Amazon help with collating that data, processing it, and hopefully integrating renewables into the grid?
You bet. And I'm glad you think of us as more than just a series of warehouses delivering packages to customers.
Well, that was just to...
Though we're really happy to do that
clarify.
too, and hopefully there's a number of folks out here who benefit from that service. First of all, thank you to Digital Europe for hosting this. I think we often forget about energy when we think about the digital sector and the tech sector, and so it's really important we bring these things together because of the role that energy plays in enabling our business as a technology company, as well as what you're asking, which is how are we supporting the energy sector by providing digital solutions which are going to help achieve the goals for the sector, as well as the goals being mentioned by the Commission as part of the energy digitalization strategy. And so there's a number of examples I can talk about where we're working across the energy sector to provide digital solutions that are going to be really helpful. But let me try to paint a couple pictures in ways to think about this. And I think we talked a little bit at the beginning in the introduction about the vast quantity of distributed energy resources that are going to be out there across the system, whether it's small-scale solar, whether it's electric vehicle chargers, whether it's heat pumps in homes. And we've talked a lot about how this system is going to have a lot more variable sources of generation, meaning when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing, there will be increased generation. And I think when we look at that, it means, and the Commission has said, we need a flexible system, we need flexibility, and we need flexible resources. And so when we think about flexibility, there's a lot of ways we can go do that, and all of them require a backbone of digitalization to be able to execute. Without digital solutions, to be able to deliver flexibility within the electricity system becomes nearly impossible. And I think it's useful to think about what that means. If you think about homes across Europe having electric vehicle chargers outside the houses where they're plugging in their vehicles, and that we want those chargers to be running when the sun is shining, when the wind is blowing, and we don't necessarily want those chargers to be running when there's peak demand on the system. And so we want those chargers to be integrated into systems, and thinking about that, all of that is digital. And if you think about the alternative to that, imagine if we didn't have digital solutions and we needed to deploy that. You'd have to fill this room, you'd have to fill this museum, you'd have to fill probably every room in this museum with call center operators sitting around, calling people, asking them to turn their electric vehicle chargers on or plug in their car or unplug their car. It's just not feasible to be able to deliver flexibility at that scale without the digital backbone that we're going to need. So when we think about that grid of the future, the modern grid and the modern electricity system, digital solutions are going to be a key part of that. Cloud computing is going to be a key part of that. So the energy sector is a critical input for Amazon as a company, and as we electrify our transportation that's delivering the packages to customers and powers the cloud and the internet that people rely on. But then also we think about the cloud solutions. Another part of this that we're deploying now is, if we look at the EU's goals for renewable energy, the EU has to roughly deploy, it's about 30 gigawatts of new renewables every year to meet the targets for renewable energy by 2030. It's a massive amount of new renewables that need to get deployed annually to be able to meet those targets. As many of you may know, one of the bottlenecks in being able to do that well is permitting. Permitting, not terribly complex, but incredibly labor intensive. Permitting it's a lot of paper, it's a lot of manual reviews. Early last year, we got together with Accenture and Wind Europe, and we've been coordinating with our friends at the Commission, at the IEA, and others around deploying a digital permitting solution. So that digital permitting solution is called Easy Permits. And with Easy Permits, we've been able to find that we've been able to reduce permitting timelines for renewable energy projects from 15 to 12 months for reviews just down to 2 months. And so by using digitalization, we're able to expedite that permitting process, which then helps expedite the deployment of renewable energy, which helps us get closer to the goals of the EU to be able to meet the renewable energy targets by 2030. There's a couple of examples.
Okay, we'll come back to permitting a bit later, I think. Can I welcome here our MEP, Maria de Graça Carvalho. I hope I pronounced it correctly. I'm glad you could make it. Member of the European Parliament with the EPP group. And you have a very long background in energy and scientific and research matters. You were shadow rapporteur for the recent or ongoing energy market design reform, which was agreed in trilogue in December. Before that, you were also last year rapporteur on the REMIT, the regulatory revision for wholesale markets. And going way back, you were involved in the implementation of Horizon 2020, so hopefully you know whereof you speak. Can I ask, because you were shadow rapporteur on the electricity market design reform, can I ask how satisfied you are with the outcome of the agreement between Parliament and Council in December?
Thank you very much for the invitation to be here with you today. Sorry that I was a minute late, but we had our President of the European Commission in the EPP group this morning and took a little bit more than expecting a fantastic speech on digital as a big priority for the future, so I'm very happy. Actually, I just want to add that I was also rapporteur of the high-performance computing, and now I'm on the AI factories, so that can be interesting for this discussion. Yes. So on the electricity market design, I'm quite happy with the result. I have set a series of priorities, some of the red lines for the report. That was massively supported by the whole EPP group, and we managed to include all our priorities in the final agreement. So what were mainly, shortly, the strong protection of the consumers, and the consumers' protection and empowerment of the consumers. So we have introduced measures to protect, but also measures to empower. We have introduced the energy sharing and to facilitate the question of energy sharing. I have to say that was a difficult part, surprisingly a difficult part to negotiate with the European Commission. I was quite surprised, but we managed, and in the end it's there. And I think that is quite interest for the future of Europe and for the decarbonization, that everyone can be involved in energy sharing, because it was also after some limitations, and we didn't accept limitations. It's for the homes, but also for the companies. Small, medium, large companies can be involved, and that was a point for us. So the protection of the consumers also, we have a crisis mechanism that is very well defined with very strict criteria, so that we don't live permanently in crisis, but we know if there is a problem, crisis can be declared very, very shortly, very fast, and we don't need to go to a lengthy period like we did, that we were not prepared in the last crisis. The second point that for us was very important, and is the to have catalyze for investment, so to attract investment. So we have removed all the barriers that would put investors away. There were some amendments of to put caps on revenues and things like that. We managed to get rid of all that that kind of amendments. So we really need to attract investment for the grids, for the production, for everything related to the decarbonization. And the third point was the internal market, to have a strong internal market in terms of legislation, not to have fragmentation, to have a grid that connects Europe, a big emphasis on the grid. And one point, probably the point that I would have liked to go further, and we didn't manage to be so ambitious, was exactly in the part of the innovation, to have the digitalization, more decentralized and more innovation, mainly on the grid. We had some resistance from the member states that accept to have a plan, but didn't accept to have a timetable. So we were pushing for a timetable for some commitments, but it was difficult for the member states to get the commitments, because they said that they had so many commitments of the Fit for 55, so many targets, that they didn't want an extra target on the digitalization. But I think that would be an enabler, and would be very important that we advance on more digitalization of the grid.
Sure. Can I just ask, actually, the reform of the market, the electricity market directive, was prompted by rocketing prices in the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, because it was the gas price that was pulling up the electricity price because of the way of the market is structured. Do you think that had we had a more integrated, digitalized electricity network at that time, you could have avoided some of the problems that we had then?
Or at least the effects would be much less severe. If we had a more integrated, digitalized, that we could have more demanded side measures, would have helped a lot. We have still isolated the areas in Europe, and we need to overcome that. For that, we need a huge amount of investment that is still required, and not to be afraid of the modernization of the grid, to do the digitalization, but I'm convinced that will be the way forward, and even the member states will not be able to stop that. It's going to be fast, and that will happen, like it is happening in all other fields of our life. The digitalization, the AI, it's going to be present in all the fields, and also in the
energy. It's certainly snowballing, and has been since the turn of the millennium that I spoke of before. Can I move, thank you, can I move to Paris and the IEA for a sort of global perspective on these things? This is Pablo Hevier-Koch, Head of Renewables, Integration and Security of Electricity at the International Energy Agency. And I noticed that you authored a commentary that was published just last week, which warned that the clean energy economy demands massive integration investments now, and warned that insufficient grid capacity to integrate growing shares of renewable energy with demand centers is threatening to undermine progress and potentially stifle future investment. We have a global commitment to triple renewable energy capacity by 2030. Europe set itself a target to double its own. Is this going to happen? Are we on track? What are the hurdles that need to be jumped on the way to achieving that?
Thank you. Well, that is one of the main questions for us today, and as part of our role as the Global Energy Authority, tracking the progress and the fulfillment of this pledge is something that we're doing very closely. We recently released an analysis looking at how do we see the growth of renewables coming in the coming years. And with the current set of policies, what we're seeing is a significant growth on renewable capacity from here to 2028. Really impressive. really record-breaking, not aligned with the tripling of renewable capacity yet. There are some barriers to be done. So what we need to do is basically reach a global installed capacity of 11,000 gigawatts by 2030. What our analysis does show, though, is that by specific and effective policy action, we can very much be aligned globally with the tripling renewable capacity. Now, what kind of effective actions? Well, these effective actions need to reflect what are the main challenges today for seeing this growth of capacity. Jake, of course, already mentioned one of them, which is my personal pet peeve, and something I spent quite a bit of time last year working on, which is connection queues and electricity grids. Electricity grids need to be developing both in terms of new capacity, both in terms of refurbishing and modernizing and utilizing better existing capacity to allow new projects to be connected in reasonable amounts of times, to allow not only the projects to be built, but also to utilize the electricity that will be generated by those projects. So there's this two sides of it. One of it is building the capacity. The other one is utilizing that capacity for generating electricity. Now, from a global perspective, of course, you will see strong variations on what is needed depending on which region you're looking at. If you're looking at emerging economies, which are economies that require the most investment, that have growing not only industrial bases, but also population, here we're talking about issues related to access to financing, related to currency risk. When we're looking at advanced economies, when we're looking at Europe, for example, things that we need to see and continue seeing is these clear policy targets that will provide the regulatory stability, how to remove administrative barriers, and how to advance and simplify permitting of projects, but also of the grid projects that will connect these to the rest of Europe. And often people talk about digitalization as a tool, and I think this is excellent. Digitalizing grids is really one of the most important steps towards utilizing this. But let's not stop there. Let's look at digitalizing also processes. And many processes bring a lot of overhead, they bring a bit of burden and uncertainty that creates delays and higher prices. Digitalizing them, simplifying them, making them more transparent and trackable is a good way to advance. In terms of what needs to be done for advancing the integration of these resources, there's quite a bit that can be done both at the regional level, at specific countries, and here the key word is flexibility. Mm-hmm. And flexibility in the past maybe bring us to this idea of power plants that are thermal power plants ramping up and ramping down. Today, we're not just looking at modifying generation to fit a stochastic demand, but we're looking at modifying stochastic demand and stochastic generation to match each other. And you mentioned the growth of intermittent or variable renewables. And the reality is that they're going to become the workhorse of our power systems because their economic qualities are extremely hard to beat, and we see them playing one of the major roles in the decarbonization of our power systems. Advancing all kinds of flexibility, and what do I mean by this? It goes from forecasting demand, forecasting supply, observing the status of your power system. It goes throughout building grid improvements. It goes towards finding ways in which you can store energy and utilize this. And this requires a really concerted effort and strong effort across different sectors. There's a very strong aspect that is technological, but I would dare to say that very often technology is moving a bit faster than our ability to implement this technology. And things like vehicle to grid that were mentioned, can you use vehicles, batteries, electric vehicles, batteries to support the grid, are things that technically seem very much within reach, but we need to foster the environments to implement them in reality, and that goes all the way from policy to market design to business models, etc.
Yeah, I'd like to touch on that point in a minute, but just before I move to our last speaker, can I just ask you, you mentioned the need, because in the EU people tend to think when you say renewable energy, which is something like 22% of Europe's mix at the moment, 23 possibly, people think of windmills and solar panels, but actually most of it's biomass. And there's hydropower in the mix as well, which can be switched on and off, providing enough rains falling to fill the reservoirs, obviously. What the new capacity we're expecting to come online is almost all intermittent renewable.
Yes, so if we're looking...
my question is...
sorry, apologies.
Is the Commission and other Brussels policymakers keeping up with the need to digitalize and restructure the grid, reinforce the grid to accommodate this specifically intermittent power, which is going to be ramped up if we achieve the target extremely rapidly?
So we've been working and discussing the Commission quite closely, and we very much welcome the Grid Action Plan that was presented and designed. I think that as many things from the dimension of policy, the implementation part of it, which is what we're looking at right now, is what can really make a big difference between are we going to move at the speed and the scale that is needed or not. I think that there's very clear direction towards increasing digitalization. There's a clear direction for some aspects of the grid development, but many of these aspects end up depending quite a bit on the implementation of the member states. And the specific implementation that will take place is really key for following the process all the way through.
Okay. Before we touch on a couple of those matters in greater depth, let me introduce the last speaker then. Charles Delay is the CEO of Horlogy, or Horlogy, if you prefer, a Belgian company which offers digital solutions to energy providers and consumers. So what we're looking for here is, rather than discussing the political level and I suppose the macro level of the grid, we're talking about what can individual consumers actually do to participate in this new flexible demand that's going to be needed. And what can your company, of course, do to help them participate?
Thank you and good afternoon to everyone. Yes, we are working on very practical solutions, software solutions, to deal with the new challenges of the energy transition. And you introduced very well my speech. And for instance, we develop new software platforms to deal with the congestion situation on the network. If you see across along the motorways windmills that are not running, mainly that's due to a congestion situation. The network is not able to absorb the energy that is produced by the windmills. Okay, and thus we have a solution here to forecast what will be the production of windmills for the day D+1, and then to also anticipate and forecast what are or what could be the energy flows within the network, and then to proactively drive and steer the energy flows within the network by working on the transformers in order to maximize the energy that will be produced by the windmills. That solution is already running with 2 DSOs in Belgium, and the yield of these windmills has been increased by 10%, which is not insignificant. And we can do it through data-driven, AI-driven software platform by collecting meter data, by collecting meteo data, by collecting also all data related to the topology of the network in order to make that optimization happen. That's our first example. You say about, you talked about the flexibility and the battery and the e-car. There is of course, a massive challenge in that sense. Okay, if we give the signal to the drivers, that's a good time because the electricity is cheap at the moment M, and then you can start charging your EVs. Yes, but you have to take care of the capacity of the networks, take care of the possible congestion situation in the network as well. That's our solution will be, and one of the components of the future digital platforms that will deal with all the aspects of the intermittency of the renewables.
Okay, let me go into this issue of electric cars now, because it's one of the most visible signs of the energy transition. We see more and more of them, especially in Brussels, on the roads. If I understand correctly, most electric vehicles on the road at the moment are not equipped for bidirectional charging.
No, not yet.
Which is sometimes called vehicle to grid or vehicle to X, which means you can use the power for anything else. Not yet, you say. I mean, are the policymakers missing something here in not regulating or setting standards to make sure that cars must?
First of all, that's a technological issue. Thus, you need to make these batteries bi-directional. There is still some technological issues that should be fixed. Now, the new models, I won't here list the brand of the, but there are new models equipped with these bi-directional batteries, and we are working with a large car manufacturers to aggregate all the batteries and the capacity of the batteries to be, an active player in the management of the balance on the network.
So car owners could actually make money from their batteries when their car is not in use,
yes,
which is most of the time.
Indeed. A battery represents 20 days of consumption of an household. Thus, that means that you have there the flexibility to inject electricity to the network when the production is too low to meet the demand. And you will be also, contributed for that, and you will, but that's also one of the features on which we are working, that is to make that aggregation possible and to be able to inject in a controlled way that electricity on the network in order to compensate, for instance, the fact that there is no wind on the North Sea, and then you need, immediately additional power in order to keep the balance on the network.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask? This is for everyone. Then we'll try and get a bit of a discussion going before I open up the floor to questions. The electricity market in the EU, following deregulation, is based on, it's a market-based system, and we have separate zones, bidding zones, where the power is transferred one to the other. Intraday markets, day-ahead markets, people can buy energy futures for electricity. Is this system, is the fact that we're sitting here now talking about the need to rapidly reinforce the grid and introduce digital solutions, is that indicative of a failure in the market to take care of things in its own right? I ask this to the policymakers first, and then anyone who might want to share their thoughts. So is the electricity market fit for purpose?
I can start on that. I think we've seen during the crisis that the electricity market design protected us from the worst effects of the crisis. I mean, you mentioned the actions that the Commission took in response not only to the COVID-19 crisis, but also, and more importantly, to the war in Ukraine and the REPowerEU plan that we put forward. Then we saw that there was a scope for adapting the electricity market design in response to that, and that was the electricity market design reform that was put in place. But fundamentally, the market was protecting us from the crisis. Now, it doesn't mean that not much needs to be done to promote digitization, and that's the reason why we had the Digitization Action Plan, because we saw that in addition to the legislation, we need some enabling measures. And what you were saying before, shows that one of the very important measures is to foster the access and exchange of energy-related data in Europe. So we're working towards the creation of a common energy data space, but that's not legislation, but that's an enabling measure that will complement the legislative framework that exists in Europe. We started last year with an implementing act on interoperability requirements for data on metering and consumption, and we go on in order to facilitate this exchange of data. while we were preparing the action plan on digitization, an issue that came time and again was that issue of access to data. So that's something we're working on very much. And together with other measures, which I could describe, but I guess other people want to take the floor.
Maria, do you have any thoughts on that? Or?
The market works, and even during the crisis was a market response. So, but it does mean that needs to be improved, and we need to apply all the new technologies that we have, the health data space, and the Commission is working on the energy data, and that is very important. And after, you need all the digitalization of the process, as it was said here, the application of artificial intelligence. So there will be fast, I'm convinced, fast developments on the electricity market. Where do I see some bottlenecks? One is investment. We need a huge amount of investments, and something that is not very easy in Europe. And we had Commissioner Kadri Simpson some days ago in ITRE committee, in one of the committees, the Energy Committee in the Parliament, and she was giving us the figures, that requirement for the investment on grids, 500 billions. So it's I always measure in times of Horizon Europe. So it's 5 Horizon Europes total for the 7 years, and it's only available at European level, 2.7 billions in CEF. That is 2.7% of one Horizon Europe. So you see the gap that needs to be filled in by the member states, by private, and so we need to have a way to investment. And also implementation by the member states, implementation by the whole society needs to be applied. People need to buy in, and there the capacity building of people at general level, but also at specialized level. We need more people that are specialists on digital, on energy, are the two areas that we are missing engineers, technicians in Europe. Okay. And one of the reasons is because we don't have enough women in these areas. Is the lower percentage of women in the universities and higher education. Less than 20% in digital are women, and we can see in this panel.
So we need some
good that I came, otherwise
it
would be a shame in the pictures. But, and in energy is the same. I'm an energy engineer, and we were 2 at my time, but continues the same. 2 in 150, 2 girls. So that's a problem that we need to solve.
Thank you. I think you wanted to say
something. On implementation, that's a very good point. I mean, think of smart meters, for instance. It's a little more than half of the households that are equipped with smart meters. In certain countries like Denmark, it's 90%, but in other countries, I mean, the rollout is really slow. And it's a matter of implementing legislation. I mean, and the other point on investment, I mean, we're working with the transmission system operators, the distribution system operators, the regulators, to develop a digital twin of the electricity grid, which will help us in planning and investing in proper smart grids.
Okay, Jake, did you want to say something?
You asked for the policymakers first, but from our side as industry, our interactions with the electricity system are through the perspective of a buyer. And so, Amazon, we're guided by our sustainability goals, drive a lot of our decision making. And one of our sustainability goals is to be powered by 100% renewable energy by 2025. And at our last check, we were at 90% renewable, so we're on our way there. We're the largest corporate renewable energy buyer in the world, and as well as in Europe. Our portfolio here is 180 renewable energy projects. It's 6.7 gigawatts, and if you want to sort of think about that at a level it's easy to wrap your head around, it's enough to power roughly 5 million average European homes annually. So it's a lot of power. And through that, it means we interact with the energy markets a lot, and particularly around the issues that I think Paulo is highlighting on interconnection and needing space on the electricity grids for renewable energy projects to be able to interconnect and to be able to interconnect at pace so that we can go out and procure. And I think a part of electricity market design, a part of the Renewable Energy Directive, has been encouraging more companies to get into this space and to sign PPAs. And when you ask about the policy in the interconnection with the market, the one point I think that's really important to make is that the focus on the investment in grids, and I think Vincent was making that when we think about where the market really needs to go, that investment in grid is going to be really important to us as a company who's participating in the markets, both as a demand customer, but then also as somebody who's purchasing renewable energy.
Okay. Can I ask, since you've taken the floor, a very quick question about the question that Mr. Berruto raised about the access to data. Let's see, we have 5 minutes. We have to wrap up very quickly. Access to data. We talked about cars, for example. Now, a large part of the value of a company like Tesla is the data, the big data that it gathers from its drivers, and it might not necessarily be willing to share this with other car companies or in a centralized system. As the operator of cloud services, what's your perspective here? Is it easy to collate the data that you would need to run the grid more efficiently?
As a cloud service operator, cloud service provider, our customers.
I know you're just providing the
Yeah, we provide, and our customers manage and control the data. We don't access our customers' data.
Sure.
It really is a question. Like our customers are obviously building systems, and actually, one of the things that we see our customers doing is we have customers in the energy sector building renewable energy data lakes, so they can look at how to use energy sector data and be able to optimize performance. And this is actually, we built this ourselves too. Given our renewable energy portfolio, we built our own renewable energy data lake where we could manage the energy data from across our own portfolio of projects, and then have been able to deliver efficiencies across our portfolio from doing that.
You'd be happy to share that data at the European level?
Our own projects, well, our projects are owned by our developers, so we'd have to work with our developers.
Okay, let's open up the floor to questions if anyone. We have a couple of minutes perhaps. If anyone has any burning questions. If not, I have several. Please.
Just a clarification on the Data Act that enters to force this year. The data belongs to the ones that generates the data. So if you have a car, the data is yours. It's
Okay.
not of the company. It's not Tesla or any other manufacturer. So it's going to be a big change.
Okay. I mean, is that a potential barrier to?
No, that is very good for innovation, because there is a lot of new companies that can develop, that will use this data. The data is not centralized in the manufacturing. You can go to a small garage to fix your car, and the data is there and belongs to you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to have to wrap it up now, so I'm going to give you 10 seconds each to answer one last question. To close, it's 2030. The E2's met its renewable energy target of 42.5%, or possibly 45%, the aspirational target, which is double the current level, most of it intermittent electricity. And it's all fully integrated into the grid. We don't see frequent curtailments, because that problem's been solved, and that when supply exceeds demand, and there are no blackouts because there is insufficient supply. That's the vision we want to achieve. What's the most important thing that policymakers can do right now to make this happen? If that makes any sense. I hope it does. So yeah, let's start at this end.
I just grids, and more grids.
Okay, perfect.
Proper implementation of legislation.
I think we have to pay much more attention to the practical technical issues, like what is the roles and the responsibilities of the TSOs versus the DSOs, how to foster interoperability between the different stakeholders of an energy market. That's the key. Data is very important.
Okay.
But the way all the stakeholders of an energy market have to interact with each other.
Okay, that's a good point to stop on. Thank you very much. And
10 seconds. I think we need to really modernize the regulatory environment to allow this strategic and fast movement towards the future in terms of infrastructure, in terms of digitalization, and in terms of cybersecurity.
is the EU heading in the right direction? Yes, no question.
I think that there is, I mean, if you look at the anticipatory investments perspective and how it has grown, how it's considering the market reform, I think there's a clear understanding for the strategic vision.
Yes, no question. Thank you very much. And last but not least.
Practical implementation. The policymakers, at least the European policymakers, have done huge amount of work during these 4 years. About 30 new regulations, directives. Now it's
the implementation phase. Okay. Thank you very much. That wraps up our talk. Yeah. And I know some people might want to rush to the next event now, so I'm sorry for detaining you for a couple of minutes too long.
It's nice that you could make it. We're very worried about being only guys, and particularly because